Hi guys, and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial with myself, Alex Simpson, and the BMW M8 GTE. Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for signing up to the Apex Racing Academy. And hopefully in this video we can give you a bit of an insight onto tyres, pressures, how to set them up, how to reduce wear, cambers, how they impact the tyre, and how to optimize those settings as well based on some basic information that we're given in the garage in iRacing. So that information I'm talking about is the tyre temperatures, and more specifically with iRacing, really what's important to us is the wear rate. You can use additional tools like VRS to check in fine detail what the car is doing in each particular corner, but we're not really going to touch on that today. We're just talking about the basics and using the in-sim information that we have at our disposal. I obviously need to lead with a little bit of a caveat as well, in the fact that obviously iRacing do their absolute best to model a real world tyre, but it's not always easy. This is why we go through so many different versions. And it may be that in some particular seasons, the optimal tyre pressure is a position that perhaps is not even available to us. What it might mean is that our pressures that we set in the sim might be absolutely the bare minimum, or maybe even the maximum. And the reason we want that is because actually the car would perform better on a pressure that's either slightly higher or slightly lower than what we have available to us. And in that particular case, each race circuit that you go to, it might be that you are constantly running at the minimum or maximum pressure, and that is certainly the case this season, which is season 3 of 2020. We are running absolute minimum pressures all round pretty much anywhere you go. Um, that said, I am still going to tell you how to set the tyre up if iRacing make a change mid-season or something like that, or you just want to use one of our setups in a future season and you need to know how to quickly change the pressure to get it into the absolute optimal place. Hi, the BMW. Now, obviously, this car does have traction control, so it does make a little bit of difference to how the tyres may wear, and in some sense, it may hide a little bit of what is going on with the car in terms of setting up pressures. Um, Now, some drivers will run a very minimal traction control at a high level anyway, just to try and stop the car from reducing the way that or any performance coming out of a corner. You don't want it to be electronically limited. So some of the top guys will run obviously either none or very very little, so that they can really maximize the car. Now, when you do that, you do get a full idea of exactly what is going on with the car as well. And I'll lead in by saying, so we'll look at the rear tyres first on this particular car. Rear wheel drive is probably the most important area that we're going to focus on in pressures and things like that. So a slow speed corner versus a high speed corner, how will we know whether or not we've got the pressures in the right kind of range? So there's first up there is a big indication if we're in the right place is what's going on with the wear of the tyre. So if, for example, next season they change the physics on us somewhat and we still go out with the old setup, but suddenly we see that the outside edge and the inside edge of the tyre, where last season they were all lined up and they were nicely wearing out over the long runs, but suddenly we're seeing this massive surge in the outside edge tyre pressure. Now what that means is actually the tyre pressure is now too low, so it's underinflated in the middle of the tyre that can't support the load that's going through the tyre, and we're burning out the outside edge and the inside edge. And in this case, it's the telltale sign to us that we have got to head up on the pressures to get ourselves in the right window again. Of course, we could be in the opposite position. Suddenly, iRacing might open it up, and suddenly we've got uh, pressure available to us that we didn't have in the lower end. and it may be that we are burning out the middle of the tire on, say, like a 10-lap run. Always important to do a few laps. A little 1 lap or 2 lap hot lap test won't be enough to give you an indication. We need to get some real wear out of these tires. So if you do a 10-lap run and suddenly the middle of the tire is burning up and is wearing out, excessive heat will always cause excessive wear, and that will be a clue that actually we need to come down because the tire is ballooning up too much and just wearing out in the middle. So that's how we would make a really quick sweeping change from an old setup to with a new tire model to try and figure out the kind of area we're in. Of course, that will translate very, very quickly in terms of lap time as well. You will notice that on how fast you're going. Um, so yeah, so there's kind of two ways of looking at it. Am I going faster or slower? Yes or no, then I can go up or down, but it's whether you've got to go up or whether you've got to go down. Could be a good clue in terms of what the tire is doing in terms of the areas that it's wearing out over a reasonable run. Like I say, you need to do a good 10 laps or so. And that would be the same to some extent in the front end as well. If the front end is ballooning up, then this is just going to burn out here. So when you're braking, it means that you'll have no contact patch in the braking zones on, say, the inside edge of the tyre or the middle of the tyre, um, depending on whether you're too high. So yeah, too high, you'll just see this absolutely get hammered in comparison to your inside edge tyre. If it's too low, then it's going to be the outside edges of the tyre that's going to be making all of the contact in terms of your braking, and that's going to wear out the tyre much more. So that's kind of where we would tweak. So it's the same principle on the front end of the car as the rear in terms of trying to get yourself in the right zone. Now, once you've got yourself into the zone, this is where we're going to make some fine adjustments. And how we are going to do this is we're going to look at perhaps say like a slow speed corner. For these videos, I don't know why I can't get it out of my head, I'm thinking of Spa always in terms of turn 1. Okayama is another good circuit. Interlagos, another good one. A lot of slow speed corners there. Typically on a slow speed sort of corner, where we might have issues with our tires, maybe if we're running slightly too much pressure, the tyre won't fully grip into the circuit and it might just sort of wheel spin. Think of it like if your tyre is so hard, it would be like running sort of like, plastic. I don't know, tyres like fully, it's just going to wheel spin and you're just going to have no grip. And that's essentially what's going on. And what we might want to do is go down on the pressures. Think of a dragster as an example. They run their pressures extremely low because they want maximum traction off of that initial launch. So that's why they run so low. The tyres really grip into the ground at that sort of slow speed, and they're not worried about high speed lateral grip or anything like that because it's all about that acceleration. So that's kind of what we'll do. If we are getting lots of wheel spin, we can tell this by perhaps looking again at a tool like VRS, seeing what the tyre temperatures, if they're spike coming out of some of our slow speed corners, that will indicate that we've got a bit of wheel spin. But also we can usually tell by listening in the sim as well. We'll know, if you can hear that kind of wheel spin, or if the traction control is kicking in. Also another really good indicator that perhaps we are either a bit heavy on the right foot or that maybe our pressures are not quite in the right zone. Now, of course, you can't keep coming down and down and down and down because eventually you're going to be in a position you can't run, obviously, a dragster style tyre pressure just for one corner. You've got to balance it over the whole circuit. And every circuit to some degree has some sort of medium and high speed corners in there that we're going to balance it against. So again, I'll use Spa as an example. The reason we can't go too low on a pressure at say Spa is that we've got to deal with like Pouhon and Blanchimont, obviously super high speed corners. And when the car is loaded up with a lot of G-force going through those corners, effectively the tyre, if it's so low on pressure, it will actually fall over on itself. It just will not be able to maintain its integrity. And what this will do is that will cause excessive heat as well. The car will then lose grip because it will be all, it'll get all hot and greasy and things like that, and suddenly you'll find the car is really twitchy through the corners. So if we can try and narrow down the optimal tire pressure for a circuit so that we're not burning up the tires in the slow speed because we're wheel spinning, but we're also not letting the tires fall over on themselves in the high speed, what we'll have is an instantly better tire over the long run. And of course, in the race, that is what is important to us, getting those tires to be absolutely optimized so that our competition doesn't have a better tire over the last part of the race. In the GTEs, for example, we might be trying to double stint tires or something like that. Um, where if we're burning them up too quickly, we can't do that. Now, of course, the caveat in this as well is that if you're doing a little short 20-minute race, for example, we may be not worried about it. So you can perhaps just tweak it ever so slightly to favor the corners that you struggle the most. So again, if you need a bit more support in high speed corners, just go up on the pressure, or down if you need the more support on the low speed corners. It's very similar in the front end. Um, Obviously, we're trying to balance the pressure. If again through the high speed corners, the front seems to wash away a little bit, then that could be an indication that the pressure is perhaps just too low and that it can't maintain its integrity going through these high speed corners. And then in that case, that you might just need to pop the pressure up just ever so slightly. You may see some of the setups actually are asymmetrical in terms of their pressures, and again that might be because we put so much load on one tyre through a particular series of corners that it may actually be beneficial to run maybe a click extra pressure on say like the front left, for example, and that's why you might occasionally see some asymmetrical setups. In the slow speed corners, of course, in heavy braking zones and turning in and things like that, that's kind of usually like, if we've got massive braking zones into a hairpin and then suddenly the car doesn't, we lock the tires up because we don't have sort of the grip available to us. It's just the reverse of what's going on with the front, with the rears, really, with the acceleration, with the deceleration. If we're just so stiff, so much pressure, not only are we going to be just wearing out the middle edge, but we will also just be sliding across the circuit because we won't get any grip. And then, of course, because we've got such high temperatures, we just won't be able to turn in on the slow speed corners. And that's kind of what's happening there. So pressure does make quite a big difference in there. So we're trying to balance the sort of the temperature out going into the corner and initial turn in amongst sort of over actual mid corner lateral grip as well. So yeah, if you find that again, like I say, the tire is just washing out, it may be that it's just too low on the pressure and falling over mid corner. But if it won't even turn in, it may be the fact that you've just got too high pressure going in and you've just destroyed the tire on turning. Now, we are always going to give you a setup that is in the right zone. So if you have downloaded, like I have got here, sorry, not downloaded, if you've just opened up the sync program and it's synchronized up our setups with you, then it may be that, like I say, this is already going to be in the right range. So you're only going to do a click or two up or down based on your driving style. So that gives you a quick guide on how to sort of set up pressures where sort of from scratch and to make some very, very fine adjustments. Now, it's not the only thing we need to be concerned about. One really major factor in terms of tire wear and getting them set up correct is camber. And what camber is, if I just quickly flip over to here, we'll take a look. Camber at the moment is absolutely maxed out at -5 degrees. So what we are trying to do is we've got the tire, I mean that's more than 5 degrees, I know, but that to indicate that so the tire is kind of doing that, so that it's the inside edge of the tire that is basically gripping into the circuit. So what we're doing here is we are trying to get as large contact patch on the circuit as possible. Now, you'll know whether or not you've got the contact patch absolutely bang on. So there's two ways of doing that. Again, you can look at some telemetry tools like VRS and look at a specific corner. So if you're going for a right-hand corner, you always load up the left-hand side of the car, and that is the one that's going to have higher temperatures through that particular corner. So while you're going through one of those corners, the telemetry software will tell you whether or not the middle and inside, well, basically what the middle and inside tyre temperatures. It will tell you what the outside is as well, but we're particularly interested in trying to make the middle and inside temperatures the same or as close to. This means we have an optimal contact patch going through that corner. So as an example, if we had the camber really, really low, what happens when the car comes into a corner? All the weight of the car gets shifted onto this left side, so the car shifts how it's set up because it's just leaning over. And so we have all this camber here, but suddenly it's being straightened up. Now, if we don't have enough camber, what happens is that we lean beyond the point of where we would be absolutely in the sweet spot that we're looking for, and we would actually be running on this outside edge. So in the telemetry software, this outside edge temperature would be far hotter than perhaps the inside edge, and that is our clue that we've got not enough camber set on the car. Um, a lower tire pressure can indicate that we need a higher level of camber as well, because of course the tire will move around a little bit easy. So usually they come hand in hand, but that's not always the case. So really just check your data. Now, how you would know this from just looking at the iRacing information? If you go and do say like a 10, 15 lap run, and what you see is your wear rate on the inside and middle of the tire is fairly similar, then you know that you're not really in a point where you are wearing out the outside edge of the tire. So your camber is in a good place in terms of getting it, making sure that you're not in a terrible place. Because the last thing you want is the tire to be rolling over this, and you're running on the outside edge of the tire. Effectively, we want to be pushing into the tarmac here. We always want to be leaning this way ever so slightly, because we want to really grip into the circuit. This way will mean that we're just sliding across the circuit. We're not actually putting any kind of like force in. We're just sliding, and we're going to be losing mid-corner speed and wearing out this tyre in a way that we really don't want to. So yeah, so we really want to do that. Be always on this sort of inside edge. Ideally, we want it almost straight, but just on this inside through our perhaps highest load corner. That's what we are kind of looking for. That would be kind of like the sweet spot, I think, in terms of getting the camber right. Um, like I say, you'll notice this quite easily because your wear rates will be quite even over the sort of inside and middle. If we have got massive inside wear rate, then what that means is our camber is set far too high. So we just need to knock that down. If we can spread the contact patch as an average over the circuit, into these two zones, what we'll do is we'll have a really good tyre over the long run, and that is what will be really important again for lap time at the end of stints, and obviously trying to beat our rivals out there. So important to get that kind of lined up correctly. So um, of course, again, I need to put a little caveat in there. Might not necessarily be the right thing to do for like a qualifying set, or if you're in a short little 10-15 minute race. Um, if we find that actually we can abuse the tyre and get a little bit more grip out of it for a shorter period of time, then that's kind of where you can go for a more aggressive camber on the front of the car. If the tyre holds up to it, and we're not worried about our long run pace, then by all means go and be a bit more aggressive. That will give you a little bit more grip, and of course we just then balance the car out the rest of with the suspension in terms of turning and things like that. Now in the rear, it's pretty camber is pretty much the similar effect. Obviously, this tyre will come under a little bit more load. If going through the corners, if we're going for a right-hand turn, of course everything is the exact opposite on the right side. We want this tire and this part of the tire to be wearing the same, not this outside edge. So again, we will look at the corners that we're going through, we'll look at our wear rate and try and make sure this inside and middle is the same. Again, if it's this outside edge, if all three are identical as an average, that's not actually too bad, but we do really want to get more on this inside so that we know that we're pushing in. If we've got an average, then we know we're more than likely at some point on the circuit running out onto this outside edge, and that is how it's wearing the same as the inside and the middle. And again, we don't want to be like that on any corner. We always want to be pushing into the circuit. You know, think of it going through the corner, the car's leaning in, pushing in this way. Yeah, so again, if it's just sort of coming onto this way, we'll add a bit more camber. But if it's just the inside edge of the tire that is wearing out more so than the middle, then it may be that we want to take a little bit camber off, stand the tire up a little bit more so that we can evenly wear the tires over the long run. Something I've not mentioned in some of the other videos actually, but it is worth saying as well, is camber can also affect a little bit on how the car feels coming out of corners. So if you've got if the camber is slightly less, you'll find actually you'll have slightly more grip in, say, the slow corners where you're putting down the power as well. So that's something to keep in mind, especially with these slightly beefier cars that have got a lot of grunt. That if you have tweaked the pressure into what you feel is like the most optimal place, but it's still a little bit slippy, it might be that you've got so much camber in the tire that you don't quite have the grip that you want coming out of these slow speed corners, and just taking a little bit off can have a bit of advantage in terms of the grip levels that you will get. But I will say, typically you're going to want to try and set it up based on these wear rate figures here. That is really going to be a sweet spot, because we're talking then the average over the whole lap, rather than focusing on perhaps just one corner to get it into the sweet spot. If you've got perhaps a lack of traction or things like that, then maybe we need to go and look at suspension and things like that, just to try and give you a little bit more grip from suspension rather than necessarily just the tyres. We want those to be wearing at the same rate the best we can. Of course, if you do a setup adjustment, it's quite likely that it's going to make a difference to how the car leans in a corner. Obviously, a softer car will lean a lot more, and again, you might need to put more camber on. A stiffer car won't lean quite so much, so you might not need quite as much camber. So while I always like to start with the tyres and then move to the suspension, I always end on tyres with my setup building as well, because I always feel like that is something that I can gain another tenth or so's worth of time just by realigning this wear rate and just tweaking the cambers and the pressures, maybe one or two clicks just to fine tune, just to get that in the sweet spot for the long run. Right, I think that's just about everything in terms of how to use the basic information you get with the tread remaining and the temperatures from iRacing on this BMW M8 GTE. If you have any questions, please do post them on Discord. I'll try and help as much as I possibly can. Um, but yeah, that is it from me. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching this video, and I'll perhaps see you on the track. I'll catch you for another video.